Today on Building the Open Metaverse.
We can no longer really trust what we're seeing with our own eyes. Developing these technologies in ways and regulating them in ways that will allow us to maintain trust in society and not let some of these societal structures collapse, and maintaining personal kind of autonomy and identity and privacy during this time of change is a really, really big challenge.
Welcome to Building the Open Metaverse, where technology experts discuss how the community is building the open metaverse together. Hosted by Cozzi and Marc Petit.
Hello, Metaverse builders, dreamers, and pioneers. You are listening to Building the Open Metaverse Season 5. This podcast is your portal into open virtual worlds and spatial computing. Welcome back. My name is Marc Petit, and this is my co-host, Cozzi.
Hey, Marc. Always a pleasure to be here.
As you know, we bring you the people and the projects that are the leading edge of building the immersive Internet of the future, the open and interoperable metaverse for all.
And today we have a special guest joining us on that mission. Liz Rothman is a lawyer specializing in topics on regulation, ethics, and safety for AI, Web3, and XR. She's also deeply involved in the community at the Metaverse Standards Forum and xrsi.org.
So, Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And as you know, in this show, we'd like to hear from our guests about their journey to the metaverse in their own words. So, please.
My journey to the metaverse, I guess, has been one of starting with the technology. And I, as an attorney, I kind of moved into the emerging technology space about 5-6 years ago, and initially in the blockchain space, and then moving into AI and then XR. And as I realized that where this all got really interesting was the convergence of all of those technologies. And that's what really brought me to the real challenges that are faced in these digital environments, whether they're more traditional XR environments or looking forward into a digital future that we are all planning for in a metaverse. So I'd say that that's what brought me here, was really the noticing that where all of this kind of comes together and converges is where the real societal issues will be in the future, where we really need to have forward-looking perspective on regulation, and kind of the excitement of all of it as well, right? And how these spaces will evolve and develop.
Let's dive right into the thick of it and talk about responsible AI. How would you summarize the key challenges and debates happening right now around AI ethics, safety, and governance?
There are a lot of them, is how I would summarize it. I think there are every major company, every major government, international organizations, factions within governments, special planning committees. There are a million different, facets of people trying to figure out and work on these issues right now. So what I would do is categorize them in kind of 3 general areas. And that is looking at the issues that arise with AI as an amplifier of human bias and human intention in that way. Looking at how AI changes societal structures and dynamics. And then looking at existential challenges that are raised by advanced artificial intelligence and kind of the view of our worldview as humans within it. And so from the first point, looking at AI as an amplifier, we're really getting into issues of, fairness and transparency and privacy concerns when we're looking at the bias issues within algorithms and trying to figure out how we will move forward with developing this technology in a way that will make it equitable and accessible for all in our society. The changing sort of structural dynamics obviously is a much bigger issue as we look at the human labor workforces and all of these various committees around the world are trying to figure out what will happen if AI starts replacing human jobs. And then the regulatory impacts of that. Will we try to stop that from happening? Will we just facilitate it in certain ways? How will we actually value these systems moving forward and value the humans that have traditionally been ingrained in them? And so these are all kind of going along with these broader regulatory efforts that are happening and looking into this future that we're all kind of trying to hypothesize and see, where we're moving. I think that those are very, very broad issues. And then this third one of the existential crisis that we will all face with our place in the world and what human creativity is and consciousness even, and, all of these questions that we're asking ourselves right now and what our place is in this future. Are we sort of stewards of this technology, or are we guardians of the technology? Are we, where is the human's place in the future of this? And how we're going to look at these longer term risks and balances of power that will shift and change as we move into this new phase.
So in your view, what are the most pressing issues that we need to address right now?
Like the privacy, safety, trust issues that are coming up and arising at this time are incredibly important. If we can no longer really trust what we're seeing with our own eyes, that's a really big problem. And so developing these technologies in ways and regulating them in ways that will allow us to maintain trust in society and not let some of these societal structures kind of collapse in that way, which is possible if no one really trusts what they can see or hear anymore. Those are the really big issues, I think, and maintaining personal kind of autonomy and identity and privacy during this time of change is a really, really big challenge. And, over many decades, we've seen those kind of privacies erode over time as there's more tracking and devices that are collecting so much data on us. But that becomes even more important in this age of AI when data collection and the aggregation and use of that data can happen in a faster amount of time.
As a lawyer, do you make a difference? I mean, like deepfake or image compositing? I mean, we've had Photoshop for 25 years, so we were able to create, fake image since forever. It's just a handful of people could do it now. Does the fact that anybody can do it with a generative AI engine changes the perspective?
I think that the point that the technology has been there to do this for a long time is extremely valid. And it's something that we'll talk about intellectual property issues in a little bit. And I think that that's a very valid, criticism of the current stances on copyrightability of a lot of AI-generated output. When an image was photoshopped, you could spend a lot of time making it so that it was impossible to tell that it was photoshopped. But usually, if you got down to it, you could figure out that it had been photoshopped. With the creation of these kind of more like not only images, but like high fidelity video and content, then I think it becomes a little bit trickier of a question, and whether or not that kind of content can be used for political purposes, can be used for, harassing purposes. Those are real questions that need to face regulation now, where in the past, I think that the questions weren't quite as pressing as they're becoming right now.
So, Liz, you were previously talking about trust, and one way to build trust is with transparency. And you've written a lot about the requirements for training data sets and providing more transparency into AI models for generative AI. And there's calls for more transparency. So I wanted to ask, in your view, what's the level and type of transparency that you think is feasible and beneficial?
I've written a couple of different things on this topic from different angles. One of them is that we need to have a shared language among lawyers and developers and people that can actually discuss these topics without it getting very kind of sticky and where we're not really sure what is being disclosed and what's not being disclosed. And so I think that there are certain baselines that can be put into place about transparency. But one of the really important things is honesty. As a lot of times you'll ask about, especially some of these larger foundation models or neural networks, and the answer that you receive back is that, oh, they're a black box, we're not sure some of the training data that has gone into them, and now, cannot be removed or we can't take it out. And it gets to this very, a situation where you're kind of in a stalemate with, people trying to figure out how to regulate it and the people that have developed it, because it's either try to destroy the model or, or continue on as you are. And I think if we had a little bit more like sort of honesty around what is actually a black box, what could be determined. Obviously, there are some things that are not determinable and cannot be removed from these models. But that's a baseline start, is that we have this common language where we can move forward in a direction of actually having a conversation. And it's not impeded by commercial interests or egos of the people that have developed some of these things that don't want to share the information. The other side of that is I worked with the World Ethical Data Forum and many stakeholders and developers on an open standard for responsible AI called Me, We, It. And so it's a standard designed to kind of clarify the process of building AI by exposing the steps that that go into developing it responsibly. And so the different kind of categories of data selection and ingestion of data, creation and selection of algorithms and models, and then managing and testing that data and tagging to try to eliminate some of the sort of biases and issues that go in when improper training data is ingested from the start.
As you know, commercial entity competes and tend to hide their proprietary technologies. So how do we balance that needs for transparency and the needs for people to have competitive separation and hide some stuff away from other people?
How this is different, right, is that we're going to need a lot of cooperation from all stakeholders and developers in this space, and we don't always have that. And there will always be, protection of algorithms, will be protection of proprietary information and commercial interest, and that's valid to some extent. But when the models are also widely available and can be used for other purposes and fine-tuned for other reasons, we really need some balance there. And so perhaps that comes from regulation, perhaps it comes from, internal self-governance of these technologies, or like a kind of cooperation among tech companies to share that certain information. And we'll see as everything continues to evolve.
Hopefully we start to see the strong emergence of open source software. Do you see open source software or even maybe the mandates that certain layers be open sourced as a possible way to reconcile all of those?
Another thing that really, hasn't happened in the past, having like a mandate to have part of these algorithms at least be open source, or the training data exposed, it's an interesting solution to some of the problems that we have. If we'll get agreement on that across the board and compliance with it is an open question.
What kind of frameworks or standards do you think we need for handling IP rights and ownership for AI-generated content, whether it's 3D models, 2D art, code, text, and so on?
There is not harmonization of laws across the globe, meaning that the laws are not all the same in every jurisdiction. In fact, in the UK, you can protect some AI-generated output, and in the United States, you cannot, and many other countries around the world currently, you cannot, if it is, especially if it's autonomously generated or even generated with prompts, if there isn't a human author that is behind the work. And the line between human author and non-human author is blurry, and getting more blurry by the day, I think, as most of us would agree that are in this space. So the question of 3D asset, I know is very important to both of you, and it's really interesting because if there is an asset that is created or generated by AI, it would not be protectable unless that there's significant human, authorship behind the work. And so it's a good example of how this current framework that we have is not sustainable. And so I've been advocating for some time for just a disclosure requirement, essentially, just disclose that the works are AI generated, figure out the framework on the other end of, is it going to decrease the number of years of protectability? Is it, what are the parameters? But it shouldn't be this question of if it is protectable, it should be how we're going to do this, because I think we can all see, the evolution from photoshopping, CGI, and now into synthesizing content with generative AI. It's it all tracks, right? Like it makes sense, and we kind of can see where this is going. And if the framework is that you just cannot protect anything that is AI generated with, copyright protection, then in the US, then that will create inevitable, issues as that becomes every day more and more likely that everybody is generating this output.
What would it mean if we could, in fact, create IP protection on AI-generated content? Can you tell us what would be the implication of that decision?
If you cannot protect it, then companies that have stakes in making money off of assets that are created by AI will put a human in the middle there somewhere, right? You're going to make sure that it's human-generated so that you can protect that output. So there's some inefficiency that will be created by that. And so essentially, incentivization of the use of AI technology and figuring out how to integrate it in a more sensible way than putting up roadblocks to, protecting this, proprietary output in ways that would normally have been protectable in tradition if it was created by a traditional human author.
What's the impact of being able to put a copyright on something that's autonomously generated? Would that change the economics around content creation?
If the company has been expecting to be able to protect all of their output, and most companies traditionally do, protect a lot of their intellectual property as it's created, it will potentially change the incentivization to use AI to generate output. You could have other reasons to incentivize the use of AI, and right now, part of that reason is just that it's new and interesting, and we're kind of continuing to play with what's possible with this technology. But as we go into the future, I think it's going to be important to protect the intellectual property in the same way that it's been important in the past.
I was wondering if the copyright issues, in fact, will affect whether jobs are protected or not.
That's a question that I might throw back to you guys a little bit, because I think it's interesting to consider all of the possibilities there. So the use of AI to generate content is certainly changing things, right? And it's very, very rapidly going to change things. There are many different ways to look at it, right? There's one where there's scarce resources and we are competing for those resources. And so if we're competing with AI, then that means that jobs will be taken away by these technologies. And then there's the viewpoint of that these resources are not scarce, and that there's more possibility and creativity that can come using these AI, generative AI tools to expand the ability of humans to create. Certainly that will change structures again of specific jobs. I know, if you look at the writer's strike, right, there was concern over AI generated content coming in there, and then very specific rules that were hammered out in that contract around when it can and cannot be used, and when it is used, when it can be designated as kind of like an important writer in the situation. So, and then the fee structures that go around that. So certainly there are ways to regulate around it. I think what we need to do is figure out what kind of future are we looking at and do we want here? And are we trying to minimize the use of this technology, or are we trying to integrate it in ways that will maximize like creative benefit all around? And then obviously there are good and bad things on both sides of that, and risks that are involved on both sides of it.
Could be that the situation is different for text, like the writers, than it is for 3D content and some very, very complex visual effects, work that right now there is scarcity. I mean, there's only a handful of people in the world that can actually do this work. So we as technologists, and particularly as optimist technologists, we see that, the acceleration provided by AI is a good thing, because it will allow the democratization of 3D. It will enable the metaverse, because it will enable a lot of more 3D production. And in the sense that it's an enabler, it doesn't take much away, because there's not a lot of people that can actually produce good-looking, interactive 3D experiences today. But I can see why the writers for text, have a different perspective. So it's not a real simple conversation, probably.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that very directly in a way that maybe the writers aren't right now, right? And that you're seeing the expansion and the need for 3D content generation, and the possibility that if more people can develop in this way, that it's going to increase the level of the playing field for everybody, and that it will create more kind of interesting things in the space. And that is a harder leap, I think, for a more traditional, creative profession like writing. It's a harder leap to make that, have that trust that that's going to happen, and who knows if it actually is, right? But it's a bigger question, and you could see why it's a little bit more of an existential fear on that side.
So we wanted to talk a bit about data usage and bias. I mean, my understanding is we can train models, and then models can be tuned. When it comes to like biased, illegal, or unethical data that's been used to train an AI model, I mean, how feasible is it to then fully remove its influence and impacts?
From my understanding, from all of my conversations with developers, I don't think it is. It's not that feasible once it's been trained. I've heard from different people that there are, processes in the works, and there are filters that go, like post-processing filters that can kind of help to pull out some of this data, especially when artists were asking for their works and their style to be removed from training sets. But my understanding is that it is never fully removed in many of these models. And if we'll get to a point where it is possible to track and remove data from the weights, that will be an interesting time, but I don't think that we're there right now, which makes it a very interesting question from a legal standpoint, because what are the damages? If somebody suffers damages from one of these models, usually what would happen is you would have an injunction to stop the use of the model, which in many cases is not possible because the models have been released widely or leaked or have been released open source. And so at that point, how can you really, quantify damages there from a legal standpoint? But I don't think that it's, if illegal data has been used, then we're going to have to figure out a model to deal with that. And first, we have to know what data was used, which is also a problem with a lot of these bigger foundation models.
What kind of a regulatory framework or audit process do we need to get responsible data sourcing?
using sort of like a transparent data lineage, right, where we can see what data has been used in the training. And there were discussions around using kind of FDA style review boards to look at training data and see if that was, a viable option for oversight boards on what kind of data is being used, bias detection mechanisms to, and those are more technological solutions to the problem. But I think those are kind of the main focal points for that kind of innovation.
Do you think the frameworks and standards, should they be developed at the national level? Would it be global? The metaverse, we don't think it's going to have any frontiers.
Big questions on the intellectual property front, on kind of everything, right? There's also, a lot of international organizations, international policing organizations, NGOs, everybody's trying to figure out what are we going to do with these spaces because they are not within nation state borders. It creates this problem of, are we going to have an international treaty on AI regulation? Are we, what's happening right now is that some nations or some jurisdictions are just moving forward with their AI regulation. If you take what happened with GDPR, you're going to end up possibly in a situation where everybody kind of just follows suit on what happened in the European Union with AI regulation and what's happening right now. Ideally, we would have a global structure to regulate technologies that are globally impactful. It is difficult to get giant nation states such as the US and China to sign on to international agreements like that. All of the myriad of regulatory efforts that are taking place right now are well-meaning. I think everybody is kind of trying to figure out what we're going to do. Are we going to regulate this like the IAEA did for nuclear weapons? Are we going to, what is the framework that we're going to use for AI regulation? And I think it's all very well-meaning, but all that matters at the end of the day is how it comes together and how we can kind of work together and have a cohesive agreement that will be followed by all the stakeholders in the industry as well. And so, open questions, but yes, certainly global regulation would be for the best here, given the global nature of the problem.
What gives you hope, and what gives you concern when you look at the way we're tackling those problems right now?
So I think the thing that gives me the most hope is the international conversation and the international dialogue that's happening right now. It was a conversation that wasn't happening for a long time and now is happening. And that's incredibly important. Where we, as I said before, where we kind of take that conversation and how we bring it all together and converge into these digital spaces, especially going into the future, will be crucial to how effective this regulation will be. But certainly the international conversations and dialogue that are happening are very hopeful. Some of these things, it's very difficult to put the cat back in the bag, right? But that's already happened, that we've moved past a point where we can actually go back on some of the things that have happened. And so as technologies develop even further at a faster pace, then if regulatory efforts don't catch up to them, then we will end up in a situation where it's very difficult to kind of clean up the mess that has occurred.
So let's talk about xrsi.org. So this is a global nonprofit standards developing organization focused on promoting privacy, security, and ethics and immersive environments like VR and AR to help build safe virtual environments. And you're an advisor. Tell us about your involvement.
Yeah, I've been involved with XRSI for a few years. It is run by Kavya Perlman, who was the former head of cybersecurity for Second Life many, many years ago and has some very interesting perspective. We are very multifaceted. We have a medical XR division. We have child safety project. And then we work on general privacy and safety issues and advise governments and organizations all over the world on privacy and safety issues, which are now being looked at by a lot of people, which had not been the case in the past. And so that's really nice to see that these issues are much more front and center. What we offer that many cannot is that we're a nonprofit and looking at these issues from a very privacy, safety, and inclusion sort of perspective that is, not self-interested and profit motivated.
You're also a member of the board alongside with Mr. Cozzi here at the Metaverse Standard Forum. Congratulations. So why did you pick this organization to get involved?
Well, about a year or so ago, right, the Metaverse Standards Forum started to come together, and it seemed, I am representing XRSI on the board for the Metaverse Standards Forum, but it is a really unique effort to bring together so much expertise from so many different areas. And I always, whenever I'm talking to anybody from the forum, I learn something about their perspective and their viewpoint on this. And the word standards in general has so many different meanings and so many different, different disciplines. And I think it is so crucial and important that these things can come together in a way that is, again, in sort of a sense where there is not, profit-driven motive. It's coming together to try to build these standards and make a more efficient and safer metaverse in the future.
Patrick and I have been deeply involved in this organization too, having a place to discuss and where, SDO and vendors can exchange ideas and align. I mean, the metaverse is going to force a convergence of many, many fields, and therefore many standards will have to converge. And then because it's going to be the internet for every one of us, the stakes are very high around its implication, around safety, privacy, and all those things. So we think it's an important effort. So
I think it can't sort of be underestimated how much at this time something like that is needed, where different disciplines come together and can discuss these issues and really come up with plans to move forward, and how much the convergence of these technologies will change, our digital futures as well.
And we had a conversation with Neil Trevitt and crew on season 1, episode 2 of this podcast that helped spark the forum, which is pretty cool history. Everything that we've talked about today and all that you're doing, you're also a certified blockchain solution architect. Could you tell us a bit about how you're envisioning Web3 and its future?
Web3 integration into, sort of immersive platforms and digital environments. My viewpoint right now is that the crucial part is identity, and identity and sort of validation and provenance of content, right? Where did this come from? Who is this person I'm interacting with? That will be incredibly important for, financial transactions and digital environments. It'll be important for personal transactions. And so my personal standpoint right now on the integration of Web3 into the future metaverse and into digital environments is that's where the crucial use of cryptography and of blockchains can come in, especially at early stages of development here.
Where do you think Web3 goes from here?
The word metaverse is even a problem, right? Because of the hype bubble that happened in, over the last couple of years in the NFT space and the crypto space. And I think to me, it's kind of funny, right? That on one hand, the metaverse is dead. And on the other hand, every Fortune 500 company, every government, every international organization has a metaverse plan right now and is meeting to try to figure out how this is all going to unfold. And so, to me, it's kind of a fascinating point where when you hear the word metaverse, it automatically brings you to this place of, NFTs and these virtual games that never actually panned out. But in reality, what we're seeing is more of this move towards either whether you want to call it an industrial metaverse or these, moving in a direction of developing technologies of the future. And then the word, even as I said, we kind of get distracted by things. The word even changed again with the Meta announcements this past week, where now everyone's like, oh, there's a metaverse again. This is a thing. It's a very... So what I think about NFTs and the use of sort of Web3 into the future is that it'll be different than it was in the last couple of years. There are hype bubbles and speculation. There's a hype bubble right now, in my opinion, in funding for AI companies. There's a socially generative AI. There's, there are a lot of hype cycles and bubbles that happen. But what we need to keep our eye on is what's actually developing and where the best, use cases are. And I think that there is certainly a good use case for blockchain technology in digital environments for these kind of privacy, safety, and trust concerns that are arising.
I'm personally very interested in the notion of smart contract to implement, new business model, traceability of content, secondary payment for artists, and all of this. I think that aspect of it, whether it needs to be implemented in the blockchain, is a very different conversation. Blockchain have come with a lot of issues, performance, technology, acceptance, regulation. But the notion of abstracting identity from platforms, the notion of smart contracts, I think there's very, very valid. And I think we can't wait to have them in a way that's practical and works with our regulation. So I don't know if that is Web3, but that's what we would like to have.
The right conversation to have, right, is one of where are these technologies useful? So in the blockchain bubble, it was blockchain for everything, right? We're going to use this for every technology, every purpose, and it's not fit for every purpose. It's not even fit for most purposes. But when you're talking about something as crucial as identity, the slowness of a blockchain maybe doesn't matter as much, or the you're looking for more of the security there. when you're talking about, royalty structures for artists, that can probably be handled in other ways. That the kind of push to give royalties to artists in the way that NFTs did, maybe push that conversation along in a way that was helpful to then, bring about some change in that structure. But I don't know that it needs to be handled on a blockchain. So I think that there are good and use cases for all of these technologies. They're not always the ones that catch the biggest hype cycle, right? And I think that we're seeing that right now with generative AI for sure. That it's not going to be, all the things that are getting funded right now are not necessarily going to be the main use cases for generative AI in the future.
So Liz, our traditional final question, the wrapped episode, is also one of our favorite, which is the shout out. Is there a person or organization you'd like to give a shout out to?
Well, typically always XRSI as a nonprofit can use your donations to continue all of the work that we do in digital environments.
That wraps up our discussion on AI ethics and governance. I'm very appreciative that Liz Rothman joined us to share her expertise today. Liz, you offered us an admirable blend of legal insight and ethical considerations, and I think they will help our audience tremendously. Your perspective represents the kind of nuanced approach that we need, on one hand, encouraging innovation while also proactively addressing the risk. We need legal minds like yours. They have an important role to play in developing balanced policies and framework. It's not just technology, so we're very happy that we could bring you on this podcast today. Patrick and I believe that this conversation is essential as we collectively shape the future of AI and of the next version of the internet in our society. So thank you very much for being there with us and lending us your knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to see you guys.
And of course, a huge thank you to our ever-growing audience. You can reach us for feedback on our website, buildingtheopenmetaverse.org, as well as subscribe to our LinkedIn page, our YouTube channel, and you can find us on all the podcast platforms. Thank you, Liz, very much again. And thank you, Patrick. We'll see you soon for another episode.